So Amanda, you've played a really important role in the society over perhaps more than 2 decades, but yet you're not a medical person. So give us a little bit of insight into how you were exposed to ISHLT, when you interviewed, and when you accepted the job.
I first started working for ISHLT in October of '92, and but I got into the allied health professions, I guess I should say, almost right out of college, managing or getting involved in nonprofit organizations that were allied health related. Initially, it was the artificial limb and brace profession, and I ran their certification board, and then went to the athletic trainers, which was, despite its name, surprisingly healthcare oriented. And I knew from that experience that I wanted to stay in healthcare, partly because when you are in the association management business, it's easier to stay within a certain sphere of interest once you start. But also I was moving to Chicago, and Chicago is the headquarters of most of the medical associations and societies. So I figured my best chance for getting a job would be to play up the fact that I'd had some experience in the allied health professions. So I went up and interviewed with what's called an association management company. Was one of the interviews that I had. It was called Bostrom Corporation at the time, and they had maybe 20 associations under management, and one of them was the International Society for Heart and Lung Transplantation. And the gentleman who was the executive director of ISHLT at the time was also the executive director for at least one other organization. It was the American Society for Clinical Oncology, which has obviously grown huge since then. And I think they were in a growth stage at that time, and a lot of his attention was being drawn to that organization, and so they felt ISHLT needed somebody who could provide more attention and time. So they hired me, or they tentatively hired me, and ISHLT's board of directors wanted to do some final interviewing. So I remember that I met with Maria Rosa. I went to her offices in Loyola. She was the editor of the Journal, I think,
Correct.
Or possibly the program chair that year. And they wanted, I think it was program chair, they wanted me to be able to get along with whoever the program chair was. And then I flew down to Mississippi to interview with Jack O'Connell, who was the president at the time. And I'd had a lot of chance to do some research about ISHLT. Bostrom had provided me with some information, and I knew that they were looking for someone. I guess financially things had kind of gone a little bit downhill over the previous 5 or 6 years. So I knew they wanted somebody who could help them with their finances, and I understood that there was some problem with the way the bylaws were written and some political issues among the members. So I did my homework reading the bylaws and looking at the finances so I could make some recommendations, and went down to meet with Jack, who's a pretty imposing individual physically. He was very nice, but he asked some very direct questions about what I thought ISHLT needed to do to improve its position, and why I wanted to work for them, and why I thought I could help. And apparently I passed muster. I was very, very forthcoming about changes I thought were necessary to their bylaws, and that were just not conducive to the society operating effectively and minimizing some of the politics. And it was pretty easy to make some recommendations on financial management, because it was not really being very well managed financially. And I guess those were 2 responses that Jack liked. So they gave me the thumbs up, and so Bostrom hired me, and my time was pretty much split between the hand surgeons and ISHLT. And then, and they're 2 very, very different organizations. So, but I really got to know the ISHLT leadership was so engaged, and still is really engaged, much more so than the hand surgeons. And so I kind of gravitated in terms of my attention to ISHLT, and there was a relatively good shift. I was there in Chicago with Bostrom for about 2 years, And we'd already kind of turned the corner and had an upward trajectory. There were some problems with elections. Those were fixed with changing the bylaws. The finances kind of turned up. And it's all been uphill since then.
So when you first noticed a job opening for the International Society for Heart and Lung Transplantation, I mean, that has a different persona, if you will, than hand surgery.
Yes.
Did you wonder what these people would be like that are taking organs from others and putting in people that are dying?
Well, I didn't know anything about it. And in the beginning, I'm trying to think, I came in October of 92, and the first meeting was in Boca Raton in 1993 in April. And for the first few months, Bostrom's a big organization with a meetings department and an accounting department and a publications department, and everything was working for an association management company. You don't really feel like you're working for the association. It's very clear you're working for the association management company. So the first part of my tenure there, probably the first 6 months, was all about learning their systems and understanding the people and figuring out how to track every 5 minutes of my time so they could bill for it properly. And I showed up at the annual meeting in Boca. They had a whole meetings department that had planned it. I had no idea what was going on. So it wasn't really until that meeting that I got to meet the people, see what they were talking about, go and look at some of the scientific sessions, visit their exhibits, and get a real sense of what they were doing. And it's very technical. A lot of it's very technical. The devices, artificial or mechanical support devices, are in surgery in general is a little more understandable, just because visually you can see what's going on. The basic science and a lot of the terminology was just over my head. And MCS wasn't really going on then. So essentially, most of the meeting content was over my head. But I would sit in there and try to understand some of the terminology. I'm still not sure I know what an orthotopic heart transplantation is, but I gradually caught on, and it was, for what I do, it's not so much about the medical profession that the society represents, it's the people who are engaged and devoted to that medical profession. And so heart and lung transplantation was certainly much more sexy of a profession than athletic training. But I don't know that, and it certainly is amazing to think that you're working with people who save lives, and it makes what you do and going to work every day make a very big difference. The biggest comparison, I think, came when I was working with the hand surgeons and with ISHLT, and over time realized that for the hand surgeons, it was mostly about interpersonal jockeying for relative power within the organization and about money. And with ISHLT, it was about patients, and it was just, the two organizations were just completely different.
In this world of transplantation, especially then, and what it takes to save a life of somebody who has advanced heart or lung failure, one of the unique things about the society was that it drew in people from all sorts of different professional backgrounds. And that was kind of a unique aspect of the society.
Yes.
But that makes special challenges for the executive director.
Yes.
Give us a little bit of a flavor of the differing challenges of dealing with a pulmonologist, side by side with a cardiac surgeon, with a thoracic surgeon, with an immunologist, and an infectious disease specialist. How does
all from different countries.
And all from different countries. So how does that begin to impact your life in trying to make all of this fit together?
You have to be able to figure out a way to interact with very, very different styles. And for a while there, I was trying to think if I could actually codify it into something that, these are the rules for dealing with surgeons. This is what you can anticipate when you deal with surgeons. This is group dynamics with physicians, group dynamics with ID specialists, and it's not. It didn't really have the kind of one-to-one correlation I was looking for. But they're even though it's hard to describe, they're very different personalities, and getting goals accomplished takes, with each group, takes a willingness to figure out what's going to work with them, and then try to accommodate your approach to be one that they'll respond to. When it's a mixed group, that's a little harder because there's a lot of dynamic tension going on even among the group itself. And so one person can't really help move that group in one direction. So it takes a little bit longer when it's a multidisciplinary group all trying to go towards one goal. In general, my feeling about the society is that you can work with anybody and you can accomplish anything if the person or the people you're working with, their primary goal is something in the society's best interest. As soon as personal interest or personal gain or kind of a loyalty to their specific profession or their country starts to take a precedence, then you have difficulty accomplishing anything. So, and then my focus becomes getting that out of the conversation, because that's a progress killer.
So if you were to sit in a room and we were to have a table, we'll have a table of 5. Heart surgeons, cardiologists, infectious disease specialists, and let's say pulmonologists.
Okay.
After your years of experience, are there enough differences between these groups that you could sit down at a table and in 5 minutes of a conversation about some aspect of ISHLT, but not related to their subspecialty, could you identify them?
I could definitely pick out the surgeon. I don't know, I couldn't distinguish between lung and heart surgeon, but a surgeon I could definitely pick out. A cardiologist, pulmonologist. I could probably pick out the basic scientist. I'm not sure I could get more discreet than that, but we could do a test. We have members, I'm not sure what their profession is. You'd have to engage with them at a certain level where it wasn't a superficial interaction. You actually have to see them in their process of interacting with others and in the way in which they go about thinking about things. But I think they're very distinct differences.
But there are some fundamental differences.
Yes. Mandeep once told me I should write an article for, I guess there's a Christmas issue of it's a British medical magazine that has a Christmas issue where anybody can write all kinds of things that aren't necessarily medical, and he said I should write an article with my theories on the differences. Because you can't, I thought about it, it's very difficult to articulate. It's something you just recognize, but you can't really describe it to somebody else.
So in the late 1990s, maybe the early 2000s, there were, again, financial difficulties with the institution, with the society. And furthermore, there was a time when the security of the society wasn't so strong. There was a lot of discussions about the major scientific efforts, and even some of the people were being drawn to other competing societies,
yes,
both in Europe and in particular in the United States related to transplantation. Did you have concerns then that ISHLT might not make it?
Oh, I don't know that I've never had concerns about ISHLT not making it. There have been several flags I've noticed along the way, and to some degree, it's related to who's sitting in the decision-making seats and whether there's a concentration in one area or another. And it's clear to me that the best thing for the society, even though it's harder to come to consensus, the best thing for the society is to have diversity among the leadership, because they truly do, number one, they balance one another, and they keep the society being the focus rather than an individual professional affiliations and interests or country interests. And so I think that's important. When I have seen what looks to me like some siloing going on or splitting off, or a feeling that people are losing their primary affiliation with ISHLT, I've seen it in tension between clinicians and basic scientists. And that ebbs and flows in terms of, how much it bubbles to the top and becomes an issue. And then I've also seen it in a tension between surgeons and physicians. And that was the tension that was in place when I first started with ISHLT. In fact, there was a lot of conversation about that, more than any other in any other areas of differentiation. It was a lot of physician-surgeon tension. And then I've also seen this U.S., non-U.S. tension. Those are the three areas that I see, have seen, and they kind of come and go depending on what's going on, and particularly who is in a position of influence. To a little extent, if I were to predict what the next area of tension would be, I would say that it's going to be lung versus all the rest. That lung is becoming a big focus, and again, and MCS might be the same thing, and which is not a bad thing. I think every group should maybe have its day in the sun, but the key is to allow that group to have kind of be the focus for a while without them trying to marginalize the other aspects of the society. And that's the key to keeping ISHLT from feeling like it's starting to become less effective and start to diminish.
So let's switch to a different area for a moment. So what about the patients? What about the people that are affected? So from your position, you're not a medical person, you're not a physician, but yet we're talking about patients who would otherwise die without the interventions of transplantation or mechanical support. And even all of these other ancillary efforts are supporting efforts to provide the knowledge to prevent their dying. Does that affect you at all? Does that touch you at all when you're going through this process to keep things moving ahead in the society? Or is this an organizational effort among professionals?
I don't think I could work for a patient-based organization for a number of reasons. Well, I guess I'll start by saying why I like doing what I do. I like facilitating people who are trying to achieve a goal greater than themselves. I don't want to be the leader of that process, but I really like helping other people achieve that. And that is the definition of what y'all do. And that's just kind of the niche that I feel where I belong. A patient organization becomes, well, I guess I should back up. So the organizations I have least enjoyed working with are the ones that there is no greater goal. It's all about them. And that doesn't have to be medical professionals. It could be, at one point I was consulting for the Auctioneers Society of Texas. And, organizations that are all about furthering themselves in terms of reimbursement or promotion or things that are just very self-beneficial. I don't want to work for them. I don't like working for them, and I don't find it rewarding because there's not a larger goal. With patient-based organizations, I'm a little worried that it would be so consuming about the very dire problems the patients face that it would be, number one, it would seem relatively hopeless to try to feel like you could make a difference. And number two, it would be too much focused on the members and not on any bigger picture. So I don't think I could work for a patient organization, and if ISHLT was very patient focused, I probably wouldn't be the right person, because that's not just, I don't think I would be helpful.
But does it make a difference? Does it help you get through those difficult times, knowing that, not that you're dealing with patients, but what these people do?
Oh, absolutely. If something like helping patients, or really if helping other people weren't the goal of the society, I would not work for the society. That is absolutely the motivator, because really y'all, because as I said, y'all aren't trying to get me to help you do something that helps you. You want me to help you do something that helps a third party, which is the patients. And that's very rewarding and very motivating, and enables you to look to something bigger than what your current surroundings are, for why you go to the office every day and why you get up every day. And it's absolutely essential to me wanting to do this job. So to some extent, whether it's transplant or another profession, that's probably the more interchangeable part. It's the focus on helping others that I think would be the deal breaker in terms of me wanting to be involved.
So looking forward, what are the challenges that face the society, not necessarily in just existing, but in thriving and making a difference? What are the challenges that are in the way of that?
Well, I've seen there's been a lot of growth in the past few years, and there's been some sort of a shift, and I haven't been able to figure out what it is, but it feels, and maybe it's just me getting old, and everybody that I knew from the beginning is aging with me. And so we're a smaller and smaller percentage of the whole now. But it strikes me that when I had first joined ISHLT, it felt like a family of people. Everybody knew, not everybody knew each other, but everybody was engaged in what seemed like the same endeavor. And the larger ISHLT gets and the younger it gets, it seems that that feeling of family is starting to diminish. And and I think that's partly due to growth. That always happens when you get larger. It's partly due to increased diversification of specialties, because ISHLT has far more people engaged in different specialties, and just by virtue of having recognized groups for ID, for pediatrics, for basic science, they're going to gravitate to that group, and so they don't always interact in the same level with the whole as they used to. And I think that it's probably partly just a generational issue with regard to just a lack or a reduction in all organizations of a willingness to commit time, especially personal time, to an organization. It's just not something current generations are as inclined to do. A lot of membership organizations ISHLT is gaining members, but most are losing members, because affiliations now are more temporary than permanent. And I've heard you say a lot to younger people, pick one or two organizations you really want to devote your time and attention to, and go with them. And that's not, I don't think, the norm anymore. I think it's more, well, I'll go with this organization when it's beneficial to me, and then I'll switch over to this one and switch over to that one. And I'm hoping that's not the case. I would think it would be least likely to happen in medical professions, because relationships and progression through your career are very much network-based. And so I would hope that would keep professional societies in medicine together more so than other organizations that aren't medical-based and aren't training-based. But I still see a little bit of that I think might start to be a challenge for ISHLT.
So if I'm a young surgeon interested in surgeries for advanced heart and lung failure, and I have limited access to travel days because of the impending reduction in resources, economic resources for hospitals and departments, and letting people get away and paying for it, what would you say to me to convince me that if I was going to stake my future in a society, that it should be ISHLT?
Well, I think that's an argument that, if I look at it from a rational perspective, might be hard to make depending on your profession. I think other organizations have a much easier job of it. So if you're a thoracic surgeon, making an argument for belonging to the main thoracic society is pretty easy. But if you don't spend your full professional life in transplant, which is hard to do just based on the numbers of transplants. If you have to pick one organization, arguing that it should be ISHLT becomes more difficult because it's not going to meet all of your professional needs. It's going to meet a small segment of your professional needs. And if institutions do move in the direction that they are cutting back and you have to pick one, I think that could be really problematic for ISHLT because unlike kidney transplantation, you can't just do transplant for the most part. Most people just cannot do that. I do get the sense, and maybe this is what makes ISHLT special and makes, because everybody does repeatedly say they feel like ISHLT is very special. And it may be that people have to contribute their own funds to actually engage. And there are numerous studies that if it's the effort and contribution that you make personally to an organization is hugely fostering of your loyalty to that organization. So maybe that's already going on. I do get the sense that a lot of people do spend their own money to come here because they value the multidisciplinary interaction and they care so much about transplant. I was talking to a representative from Genentech yesterday, and their CellCept is off patent, and it's basically cycle in terms of them supporting it. They're here with an exhibit booth, and he said 2016 that's gone. The company won't support it anymore because they can't make any money. But all of their employees who work in transplant, knowing their business is gone, the transplant business is gone, refuse to leave, because they love it so much that they are willing to just stick it out to the bitter end rather than saying, okay, well, I need a better, I could put myself in another position in the company and, be better compensated and have a greater position of power. They won't do it because they love the doctors. They love the devotion the doctors have to transplant and to their patients. And so, to the degree that was a compelling argument for someone to join a profession, that would be the one that I would make. When your personal finances are at stake and you're a junior faculty, I'm not sure how compelling an argument that is, but I'm sure that's what keeps people here once they join. And it's everywhere.
And if we look to the future, what is it that ISHLT has to offer that would induce somebody to make this an academic focus of their life, to invest here academically and interact with these other disciplines and people like you? What is important?
I'm probably not the right person. I should be asking that question of you, actually, because I'm interested to know that answer. The ID folks who come here and pathology. I used to talk to Susan Stewart a lot about how hard it was to get pathologists to come to the meeting because it's such a small part of what they do. And she came because she loves the people, she loves the transplant part of her work. And it was I would imagine to some degree, if you can be a big fish in what's relatively a little pond if you're in a niche part of the ISHLT organization. There's a small number of pediatric people, there's a small number of ID people, and you can be very influential in an organization, which is harder and harder to do, especially in really large organizations. The American Academy of Pediatrics, the odds that the average member will rise to a position of leadership there is pretty small. So I think that has some appeal. But I'm not sure. I think it's got to be love of what they do that motivates people to get involved and stay involved. But you could answer that better than I could. I know that's what it is for you.
Okay, that's great.
Is that it?
Thank you.
All right.